Hello, I'm Sean Lambert. Today I'm going to walk you through the recent Battle of Reichenberg, hosted on the International Kriegsspiel Society's Open Saturday. And this was the second battle of the 7 Years' War that I've been covering in what I'm starting to call the 7 Years' War series. And the idea behind covering the 7 Years' War versus, the more traditional Kriegsspiel topics of the Napoleonic Wars is that it provides a similar enough setting where basic Kriegsspiel principles still apply. So you don't need to completely rewrite the rules, but it provides enough of a difference and enough of a challenge to players in adapting to the warfare of the 18th century versus the faster acting 19th century battles that I think it's going to have a good place in the club. And it is not a particularly easy topic to cover. A lot of the source material is either very sparse or very, very dense. There's not a lot of in between. So like the big battles have books and books and books written about them. And then little battles like Reichenberg might have a stub on Wikipedia and, a paragraph in a biography on Frederick. So it's an interesting topic to research. This entire series features maps that I've been making through QGIS. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, the battle itself was fought by 15 players plus 4 umpires, including myself. And the overall results were that we had a pretty much historical a collapse of the right flank, which historically caused the Austrians to retreat. However, in this actual battle, the Austrians really had no need tactically to retreat. It was the strategic considerations that caused them to retreat in real life. And so we called the battle after the collapse of their right flank. And that was after about 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 40 minutes of play. So without further ado, let's hear from some of the voices of this game. And before that, we'll give a quick overview of the historical background. This is the battlefield of Reichenberg, 1757, and it is a very interesting battlefield, and you'll note some differences between this map and the map that we used for the Kriegsspiel that we played. The most significant differences are on the arrangement of the forces at the beginning of the battle. What I did my best to do is try to determine a reasonable starting point for this battle, because it was a little bit spread out for the size of map that I wanted to use. And so the map edge is actually kind of along this left flank here, intersecting like Christoph. So that's the bottom map edge. And we actually didn't have any of these units represented on the field. Everything was over on the right. So the right-hand side is where all the force was concentrated, and the Austrians were slowly marching to the right. The way we got around dealing with any of this stuff on the left was that we essentially had 2 possible deployment zones, and the Austrians didn't have any command and control along the left side of the map. So they wouldn't know for sure which side was being attacked until they started getting visuals of the enemy approaching. And that's one of the interesting things about this battle, is that it does kind of take the Austrians anyways by surprise somehow in linear warfare. And they're not fully prepared because their forces are not fully concentrated. As you can see, they would outnumber the Prussians had they had everything in place. But their problem is that they cannot concentrate enough force before a decisive action takes place. This map is actually a custom-made map in QGIS, and some of the struggles with making historical maps out of GIS data are that you, for one thing, often see heavier use of small streams that can kind of erase them from history. So you see on the actual map that there is no stream here. The stream that's on the map, I don't know if that was kind of a vernal stream where it is only there in April, like kind of the rainy season, or what. But looked at the GIS data and I wasn't seeing the stream there, so I didn't put it on the map. And I don't think it would have made too much of a difference either way, although maybe crossing the stream should have slowed the advance down of the Prussians. But honestly, by the time that they were actually at Reichenberg in the battle, things had pretty much been decided by the actions of the cavalry. The players might have started with a little bit too much information versus the historical. However, that decision was essentially made to speed things up. This didn't happen, but what could have happened was the Prussians could have decided to deploy on the left, in which case they would have been able to make actual deployments. Instead, they went with the historical deployment. The disadvantage of that is the enemy knows your historical order of battle and how you're deployed in that case. But the advantage of that is that both sides kind of scouted each other out, and you kind of know the battlefields. And you know that historically this side did work, so that is kind of an advantage. What I thought what might happen is that the Austrians might see the Prussians coming, and they might try to come back past the town and hold this ridgeline here, which would have been a much stronger defensive position, which is not at all what happens. And the very interesting thing about this battle is that the key to the battle, both historically and in this Kriegsspiel, was that the Austrian cavalry make some questionable choices. The Austrians spread out in basically two lines. They were essentially demonstrating back and forth in front of the enemy. So they would come up and then they would go back. What that did is you can see how there's two numbers on all of these pieces. The top left number is morale. So morale points essentially are your combat power. But this system also includes a measure of, I call it fatigue in the system, but fatigue is really not the best word for it. What it really represents is cohesion. The idea of 18th century warfare is that you want to have things relatively organized so that you don't lose control of them, and that the second that cohesion starts increasing, you lose the ability to control them, and they might fight less effectively. Coming off the march or off a hard gallop into a position, they're not going to be as prepared to fight as they would if they were standing in lines with orders and knowing what they're supposed to do. So the idea of the double statistic to represent combat value is just to try to force players to hold back some reserves, because if you're not moving a couple of units, so say they were doing the same maneuver but they held back 3 units, and so they were using some units here, say they had 6 squadrons demonstrating in front, and they were building up fatigue, with their maneuvers and their combat, and the ones in back were just kind of waiting there. That would have been a much stronger position. That's not what happened, unfortunately, for the Austrians. Had they done something along those lines, I think they actually would have easily won this battle. They should have been able to win it relatively easily. And that was going to be the lesson learned, was supposed to be that, those reserves were really valuable. You did a good job of holding them back. Now, on the left-hand side of their line, they only have these 3 battalions, and I think that's probably the biggest problem with this particular scenario, is that there's just not enough infantry to go around, and a lot of it's coming from the left, but it never makes it. And a lot is coming from the bottom, but it never makes it. So I think maybe what could have been a more interesting scenario would have been to have no infantry here, and to have all of the infantry start along the back lines. everything coming up. Maybe have them start back over here. So they actually have to make some decisions. Like, yes, the cavalry could make it. Maybe you could start with like one battalion here, and you could have had these starting positions, or just saying, anywhere within, anywhere within this box you can deploy. Something where there's a little bit more player agency. And I think that would have been a more interesting battle from the Austrian point of view. And they would have been able to have a little bit more fun. A lot of the infantry battle in this game was kind of just setting up in your lines and standing there. And because the lines were already preset prior to the battle, there was essentially no actions needed by the players. And that really came from, I looked at the historical maps and plopped down the units where they were historically. So I think that was a big mistake on my part, and I'm definitely learning from that. And in future engagements, I think we'll have a lot more player agency in the setup phase, because what you want is the players to identify the advantageous terrain for themselves. So with that, let's go hear from a couple of players on their actions on this day. Everyone actually played extremely well today. I was very impressed. I will let Zendos introduce his plan and why he picked the right.
I was the Prussian Commander-in-Chief for this battle. I had a few discussions before we started the game, and it led me to believe that I think that attacking the well-prepared position but still having a numerical advantage is what I was more likely to do and more likely to succeed with, because I found that having such a numerical advantage, especially such a cavalry advantage, would allow me to probably maneuver around this prepared position and eventually just surround whoever was in that town and steamroll their flank. That was my assessment. Obviously, that's not necessarily what happened. How was I going to pursue that? Originally, we thought that the river was fordable, so a lot of chaos happened in the early turns when we learned that this wasn't fordable. I had to do a lot of damage control and traffic and fixing up the traffic jam. Eventually, the infantry was prioritized and managed to cross the river. And behind that, the cavalry managed to do so. And a few minor scuffles occurred between the advance guard and Prussian cavalry, but we were able to just scare them off with squares. Our cavalry, once they crossed, were ordered to charge immediately once they did by myself. Justin was able to achieve a great success, and we forced them back. This was what I had intended. The advance guard was then ordered to pursue an attack on Reichenberg. I was hoping that we could draw off some of the attention of their infantry into ours. This did not work as I planned, as the Austrian infantry counterattacked from the village and almost nearly took out some of my own cavalry, but I managed to bring up my reserves in time to stop them, and ultimately we found ourselves in a pretty strong position on the left, with most of the Austrian cavalry being eliminated. I had the delays at the start of the battle cost us dearly, and while I wasn't wrong, it didn't end up being big of an effect. I had also been ready to meet any Austrian infantry by also placing one of my, I think it's a regiment or a brigade, at Habendorf, so that I would be able to meet them and be ready for their actions. On the far left, I had a single brigade of cavalry under sniper to basically screen the enemy infantry. We figured that since they didn't have cavalry themselves, we could pretty much use it as an advantage to draw them onto us or to scare them off in some sense. This worked out as we intended. That sniper was able to draw off the majority of the column on the left, and ultimately it saved us a lot of time despite all the delays, and we won a pretty good victory. I think that's what we were really aiming for.
So if you wouldn't mind just describing your experience in this one. I know it was kind of a standing there simulator at points for you, but what was your thinking?
Plan was basically to send Lucchesi forward with the cavalry to force the enemy infantry cavalry to deploy wherever possible. We just wanted to buy time for the reinforcements to come in. I think Lucchese's cavalry was eventually obviously going to have to engage the enemy cavalry, and eventually, of course, he was going to get beaten, but I think he sold his men for time very well, and we basically have our reinforcements almost arrived. The enemy cavalry is mostly exhausted, so I think he did his job well. We anchored our position on a rather narrow part of the front, so we were able to offset a lot of the enemy's numerical advantage. Zendis also mentioned his traffic jam problem, so I suppose that helped us a lot. Overall, I think everybody did well, and I think our tactical objective, in a sense, was accomplished. We're still holding on to the village, and I think we could hold on to it for the rest of the day, so yeah.
Okay, that's great. Then let's go down through the entire Prussian cavalry command, starting with J. Rock, who was in overall command of the cavalry.
It was a good experience. Again, the traffic jam really messed us up at the beginning. And we had to change the plan twice to account for that. And then I lost one of my commanders, so then we had to just double up on somebody getting the rest of it and pitch the battle. The entirety of my cavalry got stuck in. We tried outmaneuvering, which eventually took, but it held us up even further on top of the already delays. But overall, we did what we were supposed to do.
What did you think about your role as the Dragoon commander?
And then Dragoon +4. No, that was fine. It was we had a bit of a struggle getting across the river at the start, which surprised me. But once we were over and able to maneuver, things went more or less expected. It was good seeing how your system interacts with morale and exhaustion. Again, I was startled by how quickly people got tired, but again, once I got the cadence, it made sense. In terms of 7 years warfare, it made a lot of sense to me that we had the cavalry weight that we did, given that in the 7 Years' War, forming a square was an exercise of minutes rather than a reaction as the cavalry was bearing in. So, I mean, while we couldn't exactly charge down and sweep the Austrians out of the town, but once the Austrian cavalry was driven off, if the infantry didn't pull out then, it was going to be stuck in that town forever and effectively lost from the campaign. So it makes sense to me that historically this was a victory.
Pretty much what I was doing was, I originally was heading towards Machendorf, because originally we didn't think that we had to cross over specific points. And suddenly we get a message saying that let's reroute back over where we were, or something like that, move towards east. I didn't know what was happening, so that traffic jam caused that, and then I got orders to go back to the west side, so I thought, okay. But when we kind of figured out we couldn't cross these rivers just like that, so I had to drop the idea of Machendorf and move further down west towards this unknown village. But I would assume that pretty much it's so close to the enemy area, it would probably have been guarded, so I just cautiously moved towards where the forest was. And he did have some soldiers posted there at first, but I think he was just doing sort of a shift where he sends soldiers there, and then they send them out down eastwards, and then had another group just come up there, kind of like always guarding it. So I just kind of sat there, I couldn't cross. So I just waited until there was an opportunity, in which his commander so happened to be walking out, and I thought maybe he thought it was very safe. And my dudes were exhausted, so I just waited until that opportunity happened, so then that's why I charged. It didn't turn out well. I was hoping to capture or kill him. So then I thought I could then smash those two below me, and maybe rout them and then run towards Machendorf and cause all sorts of harassment from over there by hiding in the trees or something, just to delay. But they didn't break either, so I had no choice but to retreat back across the bridge. Amazingly, no casualties on my side. I had no idea what was happening. I don't even know if my messages were being received or not. I kept sending them, but there was no response except one, and that was just asking me for greater detail.
Yeah, I mean, that is the far flank experience sometimes. How about you, Wolfgang? I think this was this your first game?
Yeah, this was my first games, and then I kind of understood what the game a little bit more. So, initially, I was supposed to bypass the Austrian cavalry on by going north and then going south towards Reichenberg. That didn't go well because the Austrian cavalry deployed a lot sooner than we expected, and then ended up going through the middle between the dragoons, Prussian dragoons engaging the cavalry and the infantry. It was a little bit frustrating because the infantry didn't move as much in the beginning, which allowed those two Austrian infantry to attack my flank whenever I was engaging the Austrian cavalry. So believe that's part of the war, I guess. It was overall nice experience. Definitely gonna try to play a little bit more in the future, get the hang of it.
So Ayla was commanding the 3rd Brigade over here, and they ended up going all the way up and around. So can you talk about that decision, why you wanted to send your men all the way up and around here when you looked like you were actually kind of pretty well positioned right here? So why did you make that call?
2nd Cav made the call to go for the gap between the town and the cavalry engagement. I didn't think it would be beneficial to go after him. Figured we'd just go sort of people wouldn't be able to join or just get to be left out in no man's land from the town. So just moved up. Initially, we just intended to move up with the cannon, sort of in reserve behind the cavalry. And if something went wrong in our cavalry engagement, I'd be able to plug the gap. And then as we moved up, saw that there was an opening around to the north, and I could swing round and come down. So I did so, and it went quite well.
The commander who was playing Lucchesi, and you had probably the toughest role in the entire battle, and unfortunately had the historical result of getting humiliated on the right. But I do think he had some interesting plays. So I want to hear a little bit about the movements that you made, where you were advancing, you would form a line, and then you would withdraw. And so you were doing a lot of up and back and forth. Why did you do that?
It was a plan by the Austrians us to trick the Prussians to basically like forcing them to form up because they think we're gonna attack them or something. And maybe that works, maybe that doesn't work. But so yeah. And then the CIC ordered me to retreat, but that was a bit too late since the Prussian cavalry catches up with me. But did that work though? What did you guys think about me going back and forth with my units?
I mean, from my standpoint, I thought it was because you'd come up and then looked at our infantry and realised you couldn't attack them from the front. So I thought it was in reaction to us. Didn't understand that it was baiting us.
Oh, it was an interesting. It was you. Especially whenever you left 4 of you, I'm not sure if you intentionally left 4 of your battalions engaged with the dragoons, and then you would draw 5 of the rest of your cavalry to kind of close the gap between your infantry and Reichenberg, because our plan was to send one of the cavalry to the rear of Reichenberg and then just wreak havoc on your units over there. But when you close that gap, I was like, well, that was a good move in my opinion.
Well, regardless, I do think you did a good job with a very difficult role. 18th century cavalry is very important to the battlefield. Next, let's go through the Austrians for their infantry. So I want to hear from first Otto, who was commanding the Guard right here, and his strategy was mainly to kind of sit in a line here. So let's hear about that.
Yeah, I started the game there and then I just stayed there.
Were you ever tempted to leave the line?
Nah, the cavalry engagement lasted longer than I suspected. and I didn't see any reason to leave the security of their semi-urban area due to the enemy cavalry presence and the incoming infantry.
Krottendorf, do you have any different feelings about that? Or I know you actually did engage the cavalry briefly, but were you more tempted to go earlier than you did?
Not really, no. I thought cavalry engagement lasted for quite a while.
I think Parker's, you were in the library trying to play Kriegsspiel. I commends the wherewithal to stick with it. And I was very impressed that you were playing from the library.
Well, it's very slow, but I like the whole game because of the fact that it's actually realistic in terms of, again, what the commander actually sees, what the commander can actually do. You kind of want to get reports, but maybe you don't. And I didn't really do all that much, quite frankly, but I enjoyed it nonetheless because I'm learning it, watching it, and as time accrues, I'm sure that I'll get much better and maybe take more forward-leaning positions and appointments. And very good. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
You had that little scary moment where you had to survive. But otherwise, your role in this battle seemed to be that you were just trying to shift things over to the right. But how did you feel about how quickly that happened?
All right. Yeah, from my position in the west, basically the main choice I had to do was to rather go west and cross the river, or to go directly cross road east. I chose later in order to basically concentrate the forces and consolidate with the forces at Reichenberg. I know the previous General Lacy chose to go northeast, so yeah, that diverged once I replaced him. You asked me whether I would have made a different decision if I didn't start it from the east. I probably would have made the same decision, but it would have taken more time before, I would have waited for dispatch from the troops at Reichenberg before starting marching. And finally, yeah, maybe I should have left one or two Italians sitting on the bridge from the very start rather than ordering the last troop to go guard the bridge. That would have saved me a few troubles with the cavalry that charged me. But overall, I don't think there was much more I could have done.
My first game, I'm Jaguar. I've been playing the game by turns, for newcomers. I wasn't really knowing what to expect from the game, so I've been glad to be second in command because I didn't know exactly what I would have to do as an officer. It was funny and it was an experience that made me a little more confident for the next game I will play. Maybe I didn't participate too much, but I like study too. So thank you for the game.